Dr. Campbell, former US Deputy Secretary of State and the chairman and co-founder of the Asia Group, will deliver this year's keynote speech. Please welcome Dr. Campbell with a warm round of applause.
Honorary Chairman, Chairman Yoon, to the entire Asan team, wonderful team that has hosted us with such graciousness here today, Foreign Minister, Ambassador, all the friends of Korea that are gathered here. I can speak, I think, for everyone and underscore that we're thrilled to be here. It's an extraordinarily challenging time, and we gather at a moment where I think our reflections are of critical importance as we try to track a course for the period ahead. Before we get started, I do want to just remind all of us of a passing of a dear friend last week. And I raise this because it has strategic importance for us as we think about the way forward. Rich Armitage died last week. He was a great friend of Asia, great friend of the ROK, a strong supporter of our alliances and partnerships. And I want to begin with this because although Rich would hate it, in truth, history will reflect upon him as a great grand strategist. Now, he would hate that. That's not how he thought about himself. He thought of himself as a very practical person, but in fact, the school in diplomacy that he led, which started off really quite small, has come to dominate the formulation and execution of American foreign policy. Let me just say a couple of words about that. For almost 30 years, there are a number of groups that thought and reflected about American foreign policy, particularly in Asia, but there were essentially two dominant schools. One extraordinarily powerful, elite, and captured the attention of business groups and other strategists in the United States and the world. And these people were primarily focused on building, importantly, a critical relationship with China. And they thought that that relationship was dominant, and frankly, all the other relationships in Asia were secondary. There was another much smaller group led by Rich Armitage that led and engaged many of us around this room, John Henry, Victor Cha, Randy Shriver, I would put myself in this group, who made a different argument that the most important way to preserve peace and stability and to advance American interests in Asia, and indeed to engage China, was to work with allies and partners in what we now refer to as alliance management. Now, it's the former group that worked with China, super sexy. You get to sit on the stuffed chairs in Shongwenhai and reflect about the French Revolution. The folks that worked on the maintenance of allied partnerships had to deal with extraordinarily difficult, detailed stuff. The operational dynamics of our forward deployed forces, challenges associated with operational issues, very detailed stuff that basically were about the functioning of our alliance systems in Japan and South Korea in particular. I think it would be fair to say that most of the people that labored in this group, many with military or intelligence backgrounds, did it in the shadows. It was not high profile. It often was unrewarding, often dealing with things that were politically challenging in several of these countries. But what we have seen over time is this relatively small group in the United States has now become the dominant foreign policy group in terms of how we think of the world, and particularly the Indo-Pacific. And that is no small feat, and that is largely due to the indefatigable efforts of people like Rich Armitage. And so I must tell you that the thing that I'm proudest about, and I look back over the last 4 years, and I don't like people who come up and try to talk about all the positive things that happened under their tenure, but there are a few things that I think it's important to underscore. When President Biden came to power 4 years ago, there was a general sense of you, clearly in China and other places, that the United States was in hurtling decline, literally hurtling decline, and that we were unable to manage ourselves. We weren't making the appropriate investments. And I think through enormously bipartisan efforts, and I will tell you that's the thing that I'm proudest of, working closely with partners on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle, and frankly more Republicans than Democrats. We tried to build a strategy that involved substantial investments in the United States in key technologies, places where I think we all acknowledge keeping the high ground in AI, in semiconductors, in robotics, in quantum computing. Those are the key technologies of the 21st century, creating incentives for investment of other countries to invest in the United States, the largest investor in the United States over the last 4 years, Korea, in so many important areas, advanced batteries, technologies, and the like. But then, as importantly, marrying that in domestic investment with a series of engagements internationally. Renewed partnerships with Japan and South Korea. We've already talked a little bit about the trilateral engagement. I'll say more about that later. The Quad, also AUKUS, a challenging endeavor, but something that I think will bear fruit and be very important, bringing India into the Indo-Pacific, working with countries in Europe. I will tell you that one of the most exciting things over the last several years was that the strongest supporters that we saw on the international stage for Ukraine, facing off against the brutal invasion by Russia, were found in Asia. Japan and South Korea were at the forefront of basically saying that this aggression will not stand. So extraordinarily important developments, largely based on the framework that Rich Armitage, others, Joe Nye, pioneered 20 or 25 years ago. And so that sort of struggle, and they largely coexisted, but the group that believed that U.S.-China relations were most important and those who thought allies and partners were most important has now been settled. And it is clearly the latter that is the dominant group in the formulation and execution of American foreign policy. Today, in the United States, we face a different challenge. And I would say, generally speaking, there are two groups that are vying for dominance in how we think about the Indo-Pacific and the world. One group, which is truly bipartisan and large, believes that maintaining these strong alliances and partnership are very much in the strategic interests of the United States. And then there is another group that argues that it is better for the United States to think about itself largely alone, largely thinking and putting its own interests above others. Now, it's often referred to as America first, but in fact, if we're not careful, it will turn into America alone. And one of the reasons that I'm here and one of the reasons I'm so grateful for MJ is his strong commitment to ensure that the United States continues on the path of committing to strong allies and partnerships. And I will say to you just quite directly that the battle for hearts and minds on these issues has only been joined now in the United States. These are not settled issues, and the voices of key allies and partners like Japan and South Korea in this ongoing debate are going to be central going forward. So what does that mean going forward? Now, I will say, as proud as I am of some of the work that has been done over the course of the last couple of years, I will also say it is not nearly enough. It was not ambitious enough, and we're going to have to do more going forward. And let me tell you why. The United States has faced many challenges during our history, but through every one of those challenges, the Second World War, the Cold War, we had the internal capacity, industrial and technological, to be able to take on any challenge on the global stage. Now, I will tell you that is different with China. They have made remarkable investments technologically in terms of manufacturing, robotics, shipbuilding, the largest military buildup in history. And I will posit to you that the United States cannot take this challenge on alone. Now, that will be controversial in some quarters, but I think the logic is unassailable. The only way forward is to double down and work much more closely with allies and partners to take on this challenge. And there are going to be some that say, no, no, we're going to do this by ourselves. That is a recipe for failure. We are going to need to work even and ever closer with allies and partners. And frankly, at the top of that list is both Japan and South Korea. Right now, I think there are a couple of things that are worrisome among so many other things in how Washington thinks about the world. One is a tendency to underestimate China. And I will say, just going for 4 years ago, thinking that the United States was in decline, now a situation that somehow we are predominant and it is China that is vulnerable. I would just underscore to this audience that so many things that China has invested in will give it enormous power and capacity for the foreseeable future. Yes, they suffer from structural challenges. Yes, they have an aging population, but many of these things will not really be significant for decades. They have enormous capacity that will affect every element of life and politics in the Indo-Pacific going forward. And we have to take that into account. I would say that the thing behind closed doors, Chinese regard the American ability to work with allies and partners as our most significant ticket to the big game. Our ability to convene and engage, frankly, causes some pause in Beijing, and it would be something that I think we need to sustain going forward. But frankly, we must go deeper. Many of our partnerships with Japan and South Korea and Australia have historical roots, but they have roots that are often paternalistic. They are thought of as tripwire. Increasingly, these partnerships have to become much more dynamic. They have to become much more equal. We need to share more of our technology. We need to do what we can to build deeper people-to-people contacts with many of these countries. And the reason I'm here now is just to quickly give you what I think is a work plan, particularly for the relationship between the United States and the ROK. And I'll conclude, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss some of these issues during the day today. So first of all, as the minister has indicated, we have an incredibly important election that's upcoming here in the ROK. It will be absolutely essential that every community between the United States and the ROK, not just the leaders, not just the diplomats, but increasingly the business community, the technology community, do what we can to ensure that lines of communication and engagement between that new government and the Trump administration are strong. It is easy in some of these circumstances to have previous perceptions or old grudges somehow to animate policymaking. We cannot afford that. We need to ensure that our alliance remains strong. We have to come up with a number of areas of common purpose. I'm confident we can do this. The reason that we're gathering here, the reason that the Asan Institute has done so much in this venue is to ensure that there is a deep societal engagement that continues between the United States and the ROK. So taking advantage of the immediate period after the election is going to be critical for us. And recognizing, setting a joint agenda so that we understand the areas that we can work together on technology and military, diplomacy far afield, that's going to be critical for us going forward. It is generally unwelcome, I hear it every day across Asia, that the tariff negotiations have been challenging. It's unclear the direction that they're going. I will tell you, I am encouraged by the ingenuity and the determination, at least that has been demonstrated by the initial engagements from the Korean team. They are seeking to use these interactions to try to expand on areas that can be incredibly important going forward. Lots of discussions about enhanced technology and other investments in the United States. That's very welcome to the Trump administration. More defense engagement, but also work in areas that the United States clearly needs help. At the top of that list is shipbuilding, frankly. The ROK has the ability to assist a largely moribund effort in the United States. One of the areas of deepest concern is our challenges in shipbuilding, both civilian and military. It is the ROK that can help us, that can work with us in very productive partnerships. There are a number of areas that I believe these discussions that will be difficult, intense, can be channeled in ways that are beneficial to both of our countries and draw us ever closer together. And I see that in the strategy of our Korean interlocutors, and I commend them for the work that they've done to date. A third issue, and we've already heard it discussed, trilateral engagement between the United States, Japan, and ROK. I don't need to tell the minister or many other people around this room, government is often thankless. It is often challenging. You struggle at issues. You have to run into roadblocks. There are the very rare moments where you do something and you think to yourself, this is why I've committed to my life, my thinking, my energy to public service. And for me, that was Camp David. I will say for years before that, in both administrations in Japan and the ROK, I'd worked with my team at the White House to try to build bridges between Japan and the ROK, and frankly, to insert the United States into that dialogue. Historically, it was the view that the United States really could not push that. We had to wait to see that there would be some developments almost organically between Seoul and Tokyo. Frankly, I reject that. I believe it is an American strategic interest to encourage closer partnership between Japan and South Korea. And when the leaders and the teams gathered in Camp David for an historic summit, it was one of the highlights, not only of my career, of my life. And I'll just give you one anecdote from that, if you'll allow me. You know, it's even hard for someone at the White House to get to Camp David. You have to go through all the security. It's a big challenge, but once you're there, it's idyllic and beautiful. The president agreed that when the Japanese and Korean teams would arrive, they would come by Marine One helicopters. They would land there and then go to their cabins before we had a chance to meet. My job was to have a little golf cart to pick up both the Japanese and the Korean delegations as they arrived, and it's beautiful and lovely forage, and there's a sort of paths, and so Marine One with its elegance landing on the lawn, and I was driving up, and the Korean team could not see me. This happened both with the Japanese and the Koreans as I was driving up, and the Korean team got off the helicopter, and they were all jumping high fives because it was so exciting, you know, and incredibly exciting, taking selfies, and then they saw me coming, and they quickly got all buttoned down and pretended it was no big deal, but it was a big deal for all of us, and it's incredibly exciting. And I must tell you, Minister, I'm so grateful. I know your role in encouraging trilateral engagement to continue. It is vital. I believe the Trump administration is committed to it, and I am so pleased that it's continuing not only at the foreign ministry level, but that there are plans for leader-level engagement going forward. This is of central importance. It is the most important strategic innovation. If we can work together strategically, militarily, politically, it will have a profound impact on peace and stability in Northeast Asia and will be a strong deterrent for provocations from a number of countries, including North Korea and China. I also want to just underscore just something. There are discussions underway of somehow bifurcating responsibility. Some are suggesting Europe should just not focus on the Indo-Pacific and they should leave it to other countries. That is wrong. One of the things that we've seen in recent years is a profound, deep engagement between the Indo-Pacific and Europe. That should continue. I think the ties that Korea and Japan have created, not only institutionally with NATO and the EU, but individual states, are to be commended. It's critically important. I believe it is a critical metric in the maintenance of peace and stability, and the idea that somehow that should just be discarded, I think, is wrong. And my great hope is that the ties between Europe and the Indo-Pacific continue to grow and prosper. I want to talk a minute, and this is something that's close to the heart of MJ. I want to talk about deterrence on the Korean Peninsula and across Asia generally. One of the greatest achievements of American foreign policy that is rarely discussed and frankly little understood is that over the course of literally 30 years, dozens of states that could build nuclear weapons have chosen not to. They've chosen not to, largely because of confidence in the United States and confidence in that deterrence. But there are things that are challenging some of the assumptions that underlie this confidence in the United States. There is the nuclear saber rattling that Putin has done in the war in Ukraine, suggesting that he would actually contemplate nuclear use in certain circumstances. There is the ongoing dangerous provocations on the part of North Korea. And frankly, there is the largest nuclear buildup of modern times in China, which gets remarkably little consideration, but it is a major strategic development, something that is playing out in corridors of power across Asia. Many countries are asking what the United States can and should do. I'm grateful for the work that the United States has done with Korea in enhancing certain engagements, underscoring our commitment to deterrence. My own view is that over time we're going to need to do more, and we're going to need to involve our key allies, Japan and the ROK, more in decision-making around military and nuclear use, much in the way we did in Europe during parts of the Cold War. There will be hesitations and resistance to this, but over time, those steps are going to be essential to prevent a proliferation across Asia, which I believe is in no one's interest and frankly could be deeply destabilizing. What MJ and the Asan Institute has underscored is attention to deterrence for deployed American capabilities are essential. This is nothing that can be left to the sidelines. A robust nuclear umbrella over our allies and partners is an essential component of peace and stability going forward. I also just want to say a moment of something that I hear privately from allies and partners across the Indo-Pacific, and that is a desire to see appropriate diplomacy between the United States and China. And I will tell you, in the current moment, there are virtually no lines of communication open. I do not believe that that is in our strategic interest. It is essential that two great powers at least have the ability to engage and to be able to walk away from potential areas of miscalculation. I'm not of the view that we face immediate risks of a bolt from the blue from China. I think the most likely challenge that we face is inadvertence and miscalculation. We need those lines of communication open to prevent incidents and accidents from escalating. And I will tell you, we face now a system in Asia in which our forces are more wired for escalation than they were just 10 or 15 years ago. I will also say I am afraid that we have taken some steps, particularly with respect to the economic side with China, in which we have not taken the necessary preliminary steps. We have not stockpiled enough. We have not taken steps to create capabilities to withstand challenges that will come from China as this standoff heats up. And I think in that environment, a degree of diplomacy, not just about diplomatic and military issues, but economic matters, is going to be essential. My hope is that through the help of private interlocutors, other countries, that both China and the United States will find a way to climb down and at least continue diplomacy at this critical point. Last thing, and I'm sorry to go on so long, one of the things that we've heard to date is the remarkable activities, particularly of Korea, on the global stage. I worked with Korea on the work they've done in the Pacific and Africa. While most aid budgets are being eliminated, look no further than the United States, Korea is one of the only industrialized democracies where aid and assistance has stepped up. Their engagement in Latin America and Africa is extraordinarily noteworthy. They are an active citizen of the world. We see an increasingly confident, active Korea exerting itself on the global stage. It is time for more ROK representation in the dominant forums of the day. That means the G7. At some point, that means the Quad. Korea needs that representation. It will send a message both to the world and its own people that its contributions are dearly valued. I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to be back in Korea. It's great to be here out of government. I look forward to further discussions. Nothing could be more important than ensuring that our trilateral engagement and our partnership between the United States and ROK remains strong in a very dynamic period ahead. MJ, Asan team, thank you very much for this opportunity.